It's time now for us to be taking on conversations with regard to the economy. Welcome aboard. Thank you so much for keeping it NBS Television. This is the Morning Breeze topical discussion. Like I said on Thursday, we focus on conversations that directly affect your pocket, that directly affect your economic stand, that directly affect your social and economic well-being. And today's conversation is going to rotate around the glossy, rosy picture that has been painted of Uganda. And of course, according to the macroeconomic performance outlook of the Africa Development Bank, it still did give Uganda a 13th position with regard to the big economies of Africa, the big economies of the continent. It does refer to the same ranking that was given by the International Comparison Program, which also did give us a 13th position. Now, whereas Uganda's GDP growth was only, whereas Uganda's positioning then was only about 1.4% against the other big economies of Africa. Like I said earlier, Nigeria and Morocco were taking up to 62%. Then we had South Africa and Egypt taking up to 42%. But also, when we look at the bigger African conversation, East Africa is taking the lead in the fastest growing GDPs, East Africa and Uganda inclusive, because Uganda's economic growth is projected to be between 5 and 7%, at least in the next few years. That is according to the latest speech from the president. That is way above the global average rates, growth rates, which were put at between 3.2% to about not more than 4%. But does this growth cascade down to, number one, the average Ugandan, number two, across the country? Because we could be talking about growth that is centered in only particular portions of the nation and not others. And how do we get to create this equity across? Joining me will be key panelists, including Dr. Eli Twineo, an economist and also Executive Director of Uganda Export Promotion Board. Dr. Eli, it's a pleasure having you, and good morning.
I am happy to be spending this morning with you.
A pleasure
and
to have you
the viewers. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming through. And also, much later on, we'll be joined by David Walakira, who is an economic policy analyst, but has been delayed a little bit. We do apologize about that on his behalf. But let's start with Dr. Eli. We've had rosy pictures. Even during COVID-19, I think Uganda's economy was considered to be one of the most resilient across the world. How do we receive such information, and what does it mean for the country then?
Since a long time, Uganda has been resilient and has weathered a lot of storms. I will tell you the good side, why, but also the bad side,
good
but which we have to
both.
change and see.
Yeah.
That first and foremost, Uganda's economy has for a long time been self-sustaining. You see, what are the basic needs of life of a human being? One of them is shelter, another one is food. And when you look at most Ugandans, especially in rural areas, in the countryside, most of them, first of all, live in their own homes, if you should know that. Sure. Most Ugandans live in their own homes. They cook their own food.
From the garden straight.
So they grow their own food. They live there in their own what? In their own shelters, in their own houses. This is important because when you look at what accounts for people's wages and salaries in developed countries, for example, in UK, one is housing, another one is power. Power to light. During winter, it is worse. You need a lot of power. But another cost is food. Because people who live in purely market economies, urbanized countries 100%, they must buy food, they must rent, but also they must pay for power. People most people in rural areas don't also pay for a lot in terms of power. So then beyond these other basic needs, they can think about health and maybe school fees for their children. I mean, the simple economics at household level. At the national level, again, Uganda's economy and resilience is accounted for the fact that unfortunately, that more than 60% of Ugandans live in the sector, live on the sector that is agriculture, that feeds them, that is a source of not only food but pure livelihood. And because of this, for example, you know, Mildred, that whenever inflation goes high, we are saying the weather has been bad, we have not had good harvests, but when we have good harvests, then we can look at core and inflation and the whole type of the whole situation of inflation, because then when agriculture performs well and the weather has been good, then you find not only do you have a domestic economy strong, because then you get raw materials for most of our agro-industry and other industries, but also you get commodities that we export to bring in foreign exchange. For a long time, you know, again, our exports have been around 60% agriculture. So we can weather the shocks because of where do most people live and what they depend on. But again, when you come to look at the services sector, why am I talking about agriculture and services sector, and then I talk about industry? The three leading sectors in our economy, if you look at GDP composition, is agriculture, industry, and services. The services sector for the last 5 years have overtaken all the other sectors to become the leading sector. And the services, unfortunately, most of them are consumer services. But also, you have industry, it has been growing. A small way in my way, for example, in 2022, it was 24, and it has been slowly hovering around on that level. But again, our industry sector, which is growing at that rate, depends largely on, again, the domestic economy, because then they get most of their raw materials from the domestic economy. Yes, we import, and at times we make mistakes and import even useless consumer goods or cheap consumer goods, a lot of second-hand vehicles. The
ICP says we spend 78% on those goods, unfortunately, that are imported.
Yes, but which we could import, substitute, or even we could do without. We should be importing goods that we use for the manufacture of other goods, intermediate goods, factory equipment, whole industry. That would be good. For example, base metal and products, what we call iron and steel products, we import a lot of raw materials because we have not yet mined our iron ore from Muko and from Busia. So we import a lot for us to make products of iron and steel.
Sure.
So I would support that kind of import. But some of the products we import, we still import food products, yet Uganda has that capacity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That paints a balanced picture, for lack of a better word. It's a balanced picture because we're looking at what is good and what is bad. Because also when you were talking about household level, I did remember well that I think we're 9th cheapest country in Africa. And when it comes to even just cost of food, we are 7th cheapest country in Africa to live in. So you know the country that you're living in. We've also been joined now by Mr. David Walakera, an economic policy analyst, like I did clearly did communicate much earlier on. And David, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time. And as you did come through, we were still making sense of these very glossy statistics that do come through every other time, and what that actually means for Uganda. But I'll be getting to you in just a bit. But with all, coming back to you, Dr. Eli, with all this rosiness, then what? Because for many Ugandans, the biggest conversation is, you can talk about this GDP growth and everything, but it's not trickling down to our pockets. We don't feel this growth.
Thank you, Mildred. It is very true that our GDP has been growing. It is very true that our GDP per capita in US dollars is now and if you account for informality, in my case, we should be above 1,100, accounting for the informal sector and the non-marketed output. Otherwise, other people think it is 1090 something, 1095, different figures. That brings us, if you do the total population of Uganda, that brings us to around anywhere 56, coming 67 billion US dollars of total GDP. In purchasing power parity terms, it means we're above 160. We are above 156, maybe around 157, around there, because then you have almost rounded to around ×3 of the actual GDP to get, in my view, to get the purchasing power parity, which is not bad. And Uganda has been growing. At one time, we were almost a third of Kenya's economy, but now we are slightly more than 2/3 of Kenya's economy. Why am I using Kenya? Kenya has been in the region the leading economy for a long time, given our political history. But Tanzania is also coming, and we must be very careful that we are not taken over by latecomers. But I am so happy that we are still hanging in there. The only challenge that I need to talk about is the relationship now between GDP growth and population growth.
Yeah.
I know we need population as a market, and that for population to be a market, it must have the purchasing power. Because if an economy is growing above 3%, if the economy's population is growing above 3%, population growing above 3%, population growth rate, that economy must grow 3 times the population size, meaning therefore our GDP must be growing at above 9%. You have heard we are doing 6%. 6% is good. But if we don't get that balance, and we'll talk about how to get the balance between population growth and the GDP growth, and then the challenge. In other words, what you produce in GDP is consumed by the population, which by all means will be too much dependent, because we know that around 70% of Ugandans are below 35 years of age, but when you go down, you can even say 60% and even maybe slightly higher.
No, the latest UDHS report actually puts 43% of Ugandans below 15 and below.
Yes, and you know that challenge? They are purely dependent, because our labor laws, if you don't want to be accused of child labor, is that you must be above the age of maturity.
Yeah.
Our age of maturity is 18. So you have a whole big dependent population. Then you have the informal sector that we cannot easily account for GDP. And then you have 60% of non-agricultural GDP concentrated in Kampala, Wakiso, and Mukono. And then I'll answer your question of, say, why is GDP not spread out? So when we come to talk about how now to spread out GDP in this economy, and for us to expand GDP, we must think about rural development. We must think about outside of this center. I know in NDP 3, the government came up with the growth triangle, and they looked at 3 corridors. There is one corridor which begins from Mbale, and it goes all the way and goes to Guru and to Arua. There is another corridor which comes from kind of down, but almost close to Mbara, and goes away and also climbs also up. And so these 3 corridors should be outside of, you want to get income distribution to the entire country, you must spread even industries, you must spread them beyond Kampala, Wakiso and Mukono.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ele. Let me get to Mr. David Walakira. Looking at all these rosy pictures, like I said earlier on, the Ugandans do not feel that growth in their pocket. And they've already said, you ask any Ugandan today, you have money, that has always been the word that does come through. And then also, Doctor did mention about a very important aspect, population growth vis-a-vis our GDP growth. I'd like you to respond to those.
Great. Thanks, Mildred, and thanks, Doctor, for those insights. For me, I would like to kick it off from the discussion of what GDP is and what it is not. It is possibly, like Dr. could have shared, it's a measure of output, which output for a given category, okay? So the category that is informal, that is in subsistence, that output is hard to track, and as such is not covered by the GDP discussion.
Sure.
That particular group will forever say they're not feeling GDP, however much it grows, because that number is not because of any of their output. So having understood that GDP is not a measure of well-being, okay? Yeah. It is just a measure of output within a given boundaries of a country if it's domestic, okay? And if it's national, then all the nationals wherever they are in the world, we can try and capture that output. So for me, directly to the question of we're not feeling it, possibly we are looking for a wrong measure of feeling. It is maybe not a feelings affair. It's what do you contribute to that output that is giving us that GDP? So possibly, are you in the services as categorized? Are you in the manufacturing, in the industry as categorized? Are you in the agriculture as categorized? Not all agriculture, but productive agriculture, where you have a bit of excess to sell out.
Commercialized.
So, commercialized maybe, but even at subsistence level, if you have any extra output to sell, okay, if there's an exchange of goods and services for return of income, then the GDP should begin being looked at as an output that you want to use to measure yourself. Because ideally, especially when the real GDP, the one that is adjusted for inflation, goes up, it is expected that there is a general level of income within the population that's going to increase on the assumption that people are getting paid more, that farms are producing more, and people are buying more. The possible indicator that you want to tell you how your pocket is feeling is definitely not GDP. There's the Human Development Index that covers a bit of health, education, and your well-being generally. And Uganda is below 0.55, meaning we're below the lowest ranking. So that is as of maybe 2022. So meaning we are, those that are looking for feelings of how they are, they are better place indicators of those feelings. There's also now the one that we like to use, the multidimensional poverty index.
Yes.
It's at 49%.
But the reason why people will bring in feelings, albeit the fact that GDP will be looking at that, is the fact that major economic decisions will be determined on such growth indicators.
Yes.
And those decisions will have a trickle-down effect.
Yes.
On the common man.
I also know that major economic decisions are made based on the poverty index. So
multidimensional poverty index, yeah.
But for me, how then best do those that want to feel the GDP better feel it? Possibly, like Doctor could have shared, there are routes along the various value chains of these particular areas that drive growth for tapping in. And indeed, just want to sit down and, definitely agriculture that has the most of us, how best can I get the most out of it? So the notion of growing to eat is okay, but if you want to get captured and beginning to feel the whole GDP discussion, grow a bit more to sell, you know? So meaning think through where you store a bit of your bumper harvest at household level, really. There are small ways that can really help us get into this discussion, as opposed to, I mean, for me, my general feeling is that GDP will definitely not be delivered by the public sector.
Okay.
It's a private sector affair.
All right. So
you want to ensure that you're tapping into all of these opportunities that are out there. How do you tap into them? Of course, being intentional, but also ensuring that when the opportunity comes up, you're ready to up and use it. The role of creating the enabling environment for people to begin to tap into that whole GDP discussion is definitely that of government, and many things possibly have been done, including having an establishment of the Export Promotion Board to try and see where else can we sell when we have a given amount of output that cannot be consumed here.
Let's now look at those indicators or those discussions. with regard to Uganda and what decisions then we will be able to get when we get all that praise and hype coming through internationally on how our economy is performing?
So for me, the first again is to say that it's a very good opportunity, but also that we need to possibly begin discussing real GDP. I understand all the numbers that we have and discussed the growth rates of have not been discounted for inflation. So then that means that is our nominal GDP. The real one, when we look at its growth rate, it's one of the ones that would be a bit more telling the real story of what is going on in the actual economy. For me, when the GDP is growing, there is a question of how fast is it growing for it to be able to give us, and all the projections we've had in our national budget framework possibly have not been hit for the past number of years with very valid good reasons, possibly. The oldest victim being COVID-19 now. If we do not grow at some of those numbers, possibly 9–10%, we shall not begin to see any of the spillover effects, even if the real GDP grows by 2.5, 3, 4. No, we shall not. So then, thinking through what are those that are participating in this GDP discussion, what would enable their growth? And these are some of the things that have been discussed severally: cost of power, cost of fuel, infrastructure, cost of money. These begin to become some of the areas that you want to, as one that is setting a policy agenda, that you want to think through. How do you stabilize them? How do you have them holding steady? We do import quite a bit, so you want to pay attention to your exchange rate, where it is going, and how best can you control it, quote unquote, but not in a way that is going to affect the market that much.
Okay. To
try and allow the market to play out what it wants to play out, but within given confines. So for me, the good numbers, rosy numbers, are an opportunity for us to situate and possibly think through how best do we demystify informal, and possibly we need to begin refusing to use that term informal, because if we made a decision, like possibly in 2020, was it 22, 23, or 21, 22, your area had an idea to buy electronic fiscal devices for everyone that is purporting to trade, or actually trading. In that way, the question of bookkeeping gets resolved, because you see what categorizes you as informal is if you cannot tell with
cannot track
record the amount of So with simple interventions like having fiscal electronic devices, you get to arrest some of those key discussions, and then we demystify and refuse that informal, because for a fact very many people in this economy are masquerading as informal, and they're making a killing out of it.
Sure.
How do we get into that? Possibly our GDP number could actually even grow tenfold if we get to
quote-unquote informal.
That informal cover, I think for me.
We'll probably be looking at how much more, because that's been one of the biggest conversations, especially even with regard to tax to GDP ratio. Who is being taxed, who is not being taxed. Let me get back to you, Dr. Eli. You talked about a very pertinent aspect of GDP growth versus population growth. With the latest Uganda Demographic Health Survey report, like I said earlier, we have more than 40% of Ugandans below the age of 15. But also, when you look at fertility rates that are higher, especially for women who are not as much educated, and of course that also does clearly show a disparity between education of women and men. Children at household level averagely being at between 4.5 to 5.6. How do we gap these to ensure that our population and GDP growth can be able to match it?
Mildred, that is a very pertinent question, and that we have to address. And you see, the fertile ones and who are producing a lot are mainly in rural areas.
Sure.
And we even account for their education. They have enough time after their gardens to be around. They could be busy in their gardens but not busy a lot. Because for you to have children, you need time to also to have time to get them.
For the activities.
No, to get
we'll keep it there.
No, to get them. For you to get children, you have to have time to. I mean, for you to get to manufacture to get items out of a factory, you need raw materials. You need to
and the process.
The process. So you need that process. Euphemistically saying that. Women Ugandan women are too fertile, and if you give them the chance, they'll produce for you a lot of children if they are available. And so this, Mildred, is important. Before I come to that population and the GDP nexus, I want to first again repeat that for us to take to have, and the GDP even in the next 5 years. You can even double, and the president has tasked the Minister of Finance that in the next 10 years he wants GDP at 500 billion. Herculean task, high hill, Himalaya, yes. But if you do, one of them is come to the population, it is a touchy issue, especially I know some people in the government have issues to do with population control, but I will touch that. First, I will touch this, that you want to increase the economy, expand GDP of this economy, you must push economic activity in the countryside, in rural areas, because most of the Ugandans who live there sometimes are not producing marketed output. In other words, one of the things is to commercialize the rural sector, is to encourage production that is market-oriented, is to, I hope parish development model will contribute towards this one as well.
I was actually about to ask what do you think about it, because that's one of the targets of PDM. Because
the parish model was targeting the Nkorera Rubutos, those who work for their stomachs, who sometimes can be, you get 68 or 69% subtract the entire nation. So they always started something. But in my view, even the other population that is in the market economy, they are transhumant participants in the market economy. We want to keep everyone, everyone must literally be kept in the market economy, so that when they don't earn money, they suffer the next day. So that when they don't earn money, they cannot sleep well. So that when they don't earn money, they have no food. So that when they don't have money, they cannot access water. So that when they don't have money, they cannot access power. You can, if you do that, and you can do it very well, let me tell you, agriculture can be transformed with value addition. And also high value crops in rural areas. You just have to be deliberate. I am not in leadership, so I believe in benevolence. And the countries that have developed have had benevolent leaders. So we need direction, we need guidance. And we believe in economics that when the forces of demand and supply fail to allocate the resources to their optimum use, then we are looking at market failure. And when we have market failure, then we call for the role of state intervention. Okay. Without interference, but intervention.
But also still, Doctor, as you continue with the explanation, yes, you're talking about production, you're talking about work, decent work at that, like the United Nations SDGs account. But you have a population, a huge population that's below the age of consent. So if you're going to engage them in production, depending on what level it is, then you are to deal with legal issues of child labor. So where is the balance?
And that is, and Mildred, you are driving me to that. Two, let's rethink population growth. And rethinking population growth, one of the ways to control population growth, and I link it to production, is keep females at school for a longer time. The whole of skilling Uganda, the whole of helping the females have, my approach, you ask me, I would focus on the females first. After all, in Uganda, every time I ask, he has delivered, I ask, they tell me it is a baby girl, eh?
Yeah,
so,
have more, 51%.
Yes, so I would first focus on keeping these children, the baby girl, longer out of producing the children. So one of the ways is to give her skills. One of the ways is to keep her engaged. One of the ways is to keep her at school. So efforts focusing on the female child will be important for stabilizing our population. Because it is the females who produce, it is the females who deliver. Having been given by Warakira the seed, they are the ones who deliver. And this is also related to production and productivity then. Because then this person who produces a lot has to stay home looking after these children. And these are dependent. So for you to balance this both, then you need to think of marketed output. You need to encourage the few who are in the production sector, who are productive and of the age of maturity and involved, not in child labor, to produce a lot. And therefore you think of, the majority of Ugandans are in agriculture, so we have to commercialize agriculture. We have to encourage commercial agriculture that gives enough incomes for the household. You see, we talk of farms as farms, FARM, and farms as companies that are FAIRMS. So we need to keep farms commercial as we keep the farms with and factories as market-oriented as well. Okay. Because then we produce, the few who will produce in the rural area, if it is commercial agriculture, and we need to deliberately do it, I'm telling you. We are trying to do it under PDM, but we need to do it for the entire rural area because PDM is only for the subsistence.
Okay. Thank you very much, Doctor. Allow me, Mr. Walakira, to take a very short commercial break. And when we do return, I would definitely want to start off from that particular one, youthful population, and I do believe you fall in that particular category. Let's take a very short commercial break, and when we do return, we'll continue with this. Welcome back, and thank you so much for keeping it NBS Television. And definitely we continue to bring you updates of what's happening with the world of economy every Thursday. The numbers that matter, what affects your pocket. As we went into a break, as we still continue to look at Uganda's glossy pictures, GDP growth and all that, how do we actualize that into tangible things that people can be able to feel? And as we went for a break, there was a very interesting conversation with regard to population growth versus GDP growth, which you also did hint about, David, a little bit. Now, Dr. Ellis seems to be vouching for keep the girl longer in school, which is totally good. But unfortunately, still the reports will indicate that when it comes to contraception use, the man will determine. And then we're living in a patriarchal society where discussions about how many children will be had and all that, even with all your education, will be determined by the male. How do we balance the both, quote unquote?
I think for me, a bit also looking at what generates the captured output in the services subdivision, which has the biggest. Trade seems to have about 9 point something, about the biggest weight in that category. And when you look at the possibly a market setting in terms of where you can think of trade in the most simplicity of ways, it's mostly women and girls that are participating. I thought to link the role of the girl, child and woman in the contribution to the whole output question is critical. Just so to further drive the point home that when you pay a bit of attention to the girl child, you're also paying attention to the output question. You're paying attention to the GDP question and the involvement of it at that. So though I would also want to say that it is important that we keep the girl child in school for an extended period of time as a way of creating a disincentive for early childbearing, because in our context, children are yours some until they're as old as 30 years old, really. So you want to ensure that by the time you set them up and letting them out, you're possibly ready for that journey. Or later on earlier, you're ready for a journey like other countries that began having them out of your household at the age of 18 or at a given age that you choose. So for me, the delicate balance is in how do we have both the boy and girl child walk this journey? How do we give them the ability to walk this journey, but also in a meaningful way? So the number of years spent in school is okay, but what are they learning in school? So, so most definitely you want schooling years to be heightened, but schooling years doing what? Picking what skill, yeah? I think for me, the notion of staying in school for the sake of school, S4, S5, S6, higher learning institution is okay, but we need to get more intention, especially if we want to link this to the output question. You want to link it to the skilling bit. So the boy child in our social structure is a key player, is a key decision maker in terms of how many children, when, and possibly who to sire them with. So you need a bit of a mindset discussion in terms of, so that when you have this very well educated boy child, they've also got another kind of life skill and education around what does it mean to have many children. And we fortunately have a Child Act in Uganda that is clear that the child is the responsibility of the parent or the guardian. Yeah. So there is no such thing as children that belong to the government. If you quickly allow me dash to a point that Dr. Eli had hinted on, how do you get people the appetite to want to be part of the market economy? Is that they need to be able to feel the difference. If they don't have money, then they can't access healthcare, education. In our current structure, especially healthcare and education are perceived to be free, and I'm choosing the word perceived by choice, because the real cost of healthcare in Uganda has never been free, be it for government, be it for us, the ones that are consuming it for free or not. Do we want to get to a point where we actually demystify the notion of free healthcare and begin allowing discussions of contributory healthcare, hence the insurance discussion? This begins to add a personal sentiment and value in some of the services that we consume, and possibly one can argue that then you would have then the critical questions asked, you know, by those that are consuming the service. In the current dispensation, we can ask the questions, but it's from a point of entitlement, okay? But in terms of, many of us don't know that we're actually even paying the tax that gives us that so-called free service. So we sit in an armchair or possibly on a stool or in a stone somewhere or on an anthill and begin demanding for, I mean, the medicine got finished, you know, there's no chalk, there's no desks, there's no, from the angle of having that direct contribution to some of those services. So possibly a shift in government to begin telling the Ugandans the true cost of healthcare and the true cost of learning. It's never free. So whatever is discussed as free, it is picked from someone who is contributing. You are paying for someone who is thinking it is free. Okay. You know, so for me, then we all begin to add value and possibly want to begin to pay more attention to participating in the market economy, in the money economy. Not to say that there is choice of those who don't want to participate, you know, but to say that then there is more intention in that participation, with the end game not being putting food on the table, but the end game having income in the household, because those are two different dimensions of what is your end game of actually working. Okay. Are you working so you can eat, then that is hand to mouth, or are you working so you can have a given level of income that then you decide what to spend the income on? Could be food, could be any other item. You know, so for me, I think it helps when we situate the decision to focus on the girl child to a bit of other surrounding and enabling factors, especially the boy child, who at the end of the day, in our discussion in Uganda, we've agreed that the girl child will not be in union with the girl child. So you want to focus on where does the story end ideally? The story can end in no union, but there will be a story ending in childbirth.
Does that then bring us to a conversation of government strict rules? We've seen other nations that have had to deal with capping population growth in particular ways, because humans will definitely react to either threat or incentive. For Uganda's case, you can talk about mindset change, education, but it all goes down to personal will. And if someone doesn't have a threat, an outside threat for that, I have the will to go, even with all that you get to speak about.
And to the extent that our food production is still adequate to be able to feed the current growth of the population, possibly one can argue that there has not yet been a justification for some of those tough and direct lines of guiding how population should go, because then you want to think through. There is an opportunity of turning that demography either into a dividend or into a cost. And obviously, we are all optimistic that we're going to have a demographic dividend from the so many young people that we have. But the dividend journey has buts. It will only be a dividend if there's a given level of skilling that population has. It will only be a dividend if that the economy in which our population is supposed to operate is very well enabled with the adequate infrastructure that it needs to participate in the buying and selling, but also if it's of a given level of quality of health.
That's very true. You know? The quality of the population is very key. Dr. Eli, let me get back to you on one other aspect. I don't know if you still want to have a rejoinder on population, because you seem to have very callous views with regard to how population can be controlled. But yes, you could have a minute for that. But I also want you to get to a very pertinent issue that you raised on the equitable distribution of this growth, where you talked about 60% of the non-agriculture GDP, which is actually the biggest contributor to the taxes, biggest contributor to the GDP, being in Kampala, Mukono, and Wakiso. And yet, we thought probably when we opened up the 10 new cities, that could be able to change. Is it too early to call?
Thank you, Mildred, but let me first say something about population. Because writing even in 2012, Why Africa Fails, the case for growth before democracy in Cape Town, in Why Africa Fails, I look at one of the ways population is important to discuss growth. There is no way you discuss growth without discussing population. Because population are consumers, they are customers before they are consumers. Population are employees and employers. Population are leaders. Population are drivers of the economy. We need, and Walaka alluded to it, but I need to strongly say it, we need strong population management policies. We need that when you produce a child, you must look after that child. I know people in town, Rosas, he has one wife, is maybe doing his small business, he's doing border, or he's a small broker, but he has seen another beautiful girl, and he goes and he's impregnated even this one. And this one will be producing, this lady or girl is also paying her own rent. This guy is not even doing, and he's proud to even impregnate another one. You know? So we need, the government must help us on how we bring sobriety, discipline. You don't just, it is not producing children and as if you are donating your seed. So we need that control, because we reach a time when population will be very a negative disincentive for our economy. Okay. Having said that, and then it is up to the government to decide how to do it.
What they need to do.
Yeah, having said that, we need to decentralize GDP growth. Yeah. We need to decentralize GDP growth from Kampala, Mukono, and Wakiso. We need deliberately to say, and not only say, to put our money where our mouth is. You talk of new cities, you go to them. These new cities are crying, and they are crying to our government to have, want government to help us. They are looking for money from the center. But as Walaka told you, those who pay taxes, both PIT, personal income tax, and CIT, company income tax, they are again in the center. They are again around here. So you find majority of the population, and I hear them complaining, our money, I hear them complaining when it comes to politics, when there are problems in parliament and what, they begin to complain, our money. What money have you contributed? Because majority of Ugandans don't contribute to taxes. That's why we have failed to widen our tax base. I'll give a solution to how to widen tax base also. If we want to widen tax base, let's merge the NIN and the TIN. What I told you about formalize the economy, especially more than 60% actually in the center here, are informal. You want to formalize Uganda's economy and widen the tax base, you must begin by merging the NIN and the TIN. And I said it when we had the Economic Growth Forum organized by Ministry of Finance, Bank of Uganda, and Economic Growth Forum recently. Because then somebody who is seated somewhere will be seeing Mildred in all ways. On the TIN and the NIN, just developed countries. And I've lived in these places. We had the SIN, social insurance number, SIN. And once I have the SIN, they know everything about me. And then we can say, why didn't you pay this? Why didn't you pay that? So we need to do that. We need to decentralize GDP. We need to push economic activity in rural areas. We need to improve agriculture. We need to make agriculture and a business for the people in rural areas. And they just don't need to be educated. No, we just need to tell them and help them that this is the right product, this is the right commodity. When you produce it, we buy it. Factories will add value, they make money. We need to make a cost of living a cost. We need to make sure that people pay for their living in this country. You need people, the government suspended graduated tax. Then they gave universal primary education. When universal primary education began, I thought it was going to be not for everybody. I thought it was those who could not afford. Now, because it became for everybody, we have crowded the whole of universal primary education. And you know what has happened? I was working with USAID the project as a contractor, and so our chief of party asked one of my friends. He said, "How many children do you have?" He said, "No, I don't yet have children, because I have 4 children for President Museveni." I said, 4 children for the president? How did that come about? So we laughed about it. And then he went on to explain it. He said, no, the 4 children are for President Museveni. He said, with the 4 children, he will look up to them until wherever. So I am looking for also my own children. And as a matter of fact, he said he had already made the wife heavy. Okay. So you can imagine that mindset. Decentralized GDP, widen taxes by decentralizing GDP. All
right, thank you very much. I will get back to you, David, on the same issue of decentralization of GDP, just making it cascade throughout. The cities are here, but like Doctor said, they're literally non-functional. Will PDM be able to bring about that kind of conversation going down? But also there is the aspect of how money is utilized and what capacity a place has over the money they collect. For example, if I collect money down in Kasese as a local government, I cannot utilize it at source. I have to first send it back, and then there will be a reappropriation. We probably need to change that kind of mechanism. So people are responsible for the money they collect and how they use it.
I think for me, the decentralization beyond politics is critical. And possibly if we also begin by reorienting the administrative units as local economic development centers as opposed to voting centers, that would be, I think, for me, a place to start. I know that part of why, for example, the structure of a county in Uganda is functional for 2 things: for politics, for elective representation in parliament, but also for purposes of health, the sub-district as is described, that is for a health center for. No other function does the county have in Uganda. And then we skip and fall on the sub-county. So the sub-county gets grants, the sub-county supervises, but you see the sub-county is in a county. And I think a county is bigger, so, but also then that means that there are districts that either have 2 counties, 3, or even 1 county, you know. There are governance decisions that are made that defeat the purpose of wanting to do decentralization of GDP. When an admin unit called a district is cut out, and that from which it has been cut, people are grappling for the most productive sub-counties in terms of where does trade happen the most, hence for the discussion of local revenue. It is important that we begin to think through what should a district be like? Is it because people have asked for a district, or because it actually qualifies by the guidance that we know already exists, but also adding now an economic one? How much local revenue should one be able to generate in your projection for you to qualify as a district or as an administrative unit? Short of that, we cannot decentralize growth, because by decentralized meaning that means you put it at the district level. But you've created a district that has 3 or 4 sub-counties that can barely produce anything at all. But that means that district has an MP, has a woman MP, has an RDC, has a DISO, who else? Has all this list of administration over it, but what is it producing out of that particular district? So for me, the discussion of decentralizing growth, because growth because GDP is an output discussion, we need to pay attention to what qualifies to be even a city itself. Some of the pronouncements that are made over cities, possibly we thought after the naming, there are some people that are called Hope, Charity, Blessing, and those names are far from who they are. So this naming of baptizing places, cities, and then you hope then that it's going to begin behaving like a city, before setting it up to be a city, defeats the whole notion of decentralizing growth, and most likely it will take us the next 15 to 20 years before we see any kind of growth coming out of there, because it is still structured not to be as an economic center, but it's simply set up as a political center, really.
Maybe finally in 1 minute, because our time is first spent, is it high time we zoned the country economically for output?
It is zoned.
Are we actualizing the zoning?
It is zoned. So possibly for me, the other bit is in terms of, besides all the enabling policy and legal frameworks that we've set up, can we start implementing them?
Okay.
And I think we are going to start moving a bit.
All right. And to you, Dr. Eli, production, output, we have all these names, like David did use the other example. I am called Purity, but it's a totally different conversation. How do we get moving as a country?
Let me first summarize what the so-called GDP. GDP is consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus import and export, in brackets, in other words, net exports. So if we need to boost GDP, we have to look at consumption. Who is consuming and what contribution are they making? We have to look at government expenditure. Let me tell you, Wareka was again alluding to that. Government has public sector transformation. And I listened to the PS of public service. I listened to the PSST, the Permanent Secretary and Secretary to the Treasury of, on this show actually. Yeah. On this show of public service, Mr. Ramadan Gobi, who said we need to resize government. The entire government. Because GDP, the G represents government sector and government spending. One of the ways we have to do it, because Wareka tells you that at the county, there is no role for a county in our infrastructure, in construction of local government. Yeah. Why do you have it? So we need, and the government has begun by restructuring agencies. I hope next it will be ministries. I hope next it will be members of parliament. I hope next it will be local government. My view is that we could have regional governments as centers of power, and then we go to the unit that is important, which to me is mainly the parish and maybe the sub-county. In other words, Mildred, you need to you need to play with the equation of GDP, which is consumption, investment, and government expenditure, and you get net exports out of trade. In other words, government must reduce government expenditure. Yes, we need to create jobs. Let's create jobs in the private sector, in the rural areas, where people can employ themselves on the farm, and therefore we reduce the government sector, because the money we are spending on the government sector now could be used to support the projects to increase GDP.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Eli, for sparing time to be with us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, David, for sparing time to be with us. And of course, we'll always continue with the economic discussions that come to you every Thursday here on The Morning Breeze. That's all we had time for. I am Mildred Tohai. Say good morning. God bless you.